All right, welcome to the fourth episode of Thought Atlas. Today we've got myself, Eli, we've got Peter, and we've got a guest. So why don't you give us your name, introduce yourself, tell us what you got going on.
Sure. My name's Drake. I am involved in the Mises Caucus, so state organizer for Ohio, and then also, more importantly, actually a volunteer in Ohio. So that's county level vice chair, state level XCOM, CENTCOM, financial director. I wear lots of hats.
And for the uninitiated, those are all within the Libertarian Party of Ohio.
And so,
Yes.
so you're vice chair of the Ohio Party.
Vice chair of the Franklin County Party. On the state
Okay.
level, I am just at large. I speak for the people.
Oh, all right. There we go. I was wondering because
Could be.
every state's got their structure a little different.
Yeah.
All right, and so today, of course, in news, we got all kinds of things going on with the whole Twitter thing. I think literally every channel, left and right, that I subscribe to did a video about that. Uh, why don't one of you two start us off if either of you has a topic or anything you want to bring up?
I have a couple of fun things we could talk about. If you guys follow Andrew from Popular Liberty at all, I am his intellectual nemesis. So that's a fun back and forth that we always bring into. Another one is starting an argument today with Michael Heiss about Jordan B. Peterson, because while I think he does good, I think he's a bit overhyped and has some glaring flaws. Or what else would be fun to talk about today?
I guess I could answer
For
before we
that.
started. I said we might get to read through the Florida, the California bill. I didn't specify which one. That won't be today, but the bill is apparently California decided that they're going to uh, fight back against Texas with another bill. This time, not a gun one, where they tried to make the gun where you could sue your neighbors and sue the gun makers. But this time, they decided that they're going to try to pass a abortion bill that exempts you from responsibility if your baby dies within a week of having it. So it's effectively you can have you could just murder your baby on day 6.
Hey, there's a
Supposedly
lot of,
that's the accusation anyway. We'll see if it's true or not.
I mean, I hear great topics in both of those. We can have the abortion debate, or we could talk about the 0% receivers. Have you guys seen the news on that?
I heard that Biden wants every part of a gun to have a serial number on it. Uh,
The- But have you heard the fun response from Ghost Gunner?
no, I haven't.
So they're officially launching their 0% receiver. And that means, because you know what an 80% receiver is. So the gun is 80% finished. And at that point, it's not officially a gun, it's not regulated, but you put it on a CNC, mill out a few pieces, and now you have a gun.
Mm.
Um, a 0% receiver is you put this block of aluminum on your CNC and it automatically makes a gun for you.
Yeah, we were joking last time. Me and Sam were talking about, and it apparently was an April Fool's article about how they had someone had made a fairly convincing, because it was a very long article too, about how Amazon was going to be banning the sale of 3D printers, but they were going to introduce their own 3D printer. And I was just speculating that wonder if this has anything to do with the ghost gun thing, like if they're going to try to control 3D printers. But then I was like, well, but the thing is that you can print most of the parts for 3D printers. So it'll just be buy an Amazon one, print a 3D printer, and then print your gun. So it's like an extra step. Who cares?
Well, all the quality guns are made off CNCs anyways, because 3D printers are great and they're getting better and you can make some guns on them, but additive processes just don't have that material strength that a solid chunk of metal that you machine away parts from will have. You're just
Mm-hmm.
not going to get as good a gun for as many shots, or at least like not cost effectively.
Right. Or, well, one of the things you can do supposedly is print out a mold from plastic and then forge something that you then clean up with a 3D printer.
I believe it. There's a bunch of illegal guns circulating around Germany and the like, and I appreciate it. It's a good world.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, Well, since you're our special guest, why don't you pick one of your topics that the two of us haven't really heard of?
Okay, are you guys interested in Andrew Prop Liberty and his archotropism and anti-tax stuff?
I am very anti-tax, but I don't know anything about any of that.
I'm
Okay.
very interested.
No, it's. Hmm. I don't want to drag you guys into it because it's complicated to explain the backstory. Actually, I'll take a shot at it. So, Andrew is the founder of the GOP Mises Caucus. He's been on Pete and a few other shows, kind of promoting first his archotropism framework, which is a framework for explaining kind of how governments form, that he came up with kind of the intent of you should understand why governments form to better know thy enemy,
so,
know how to stop
so
them.
just a quick question. So, is this like a small L MC inside the Republican Party?
Yes.
Okay, just all right. Just want to make sure I'm on the same page.
Um, and then he has this idea called the anti-tax, his branding, which isn't branding, um, which is kind of his signature piece of legislation, his main idea that everything else is built around, which is to badly oversimplify it. Um, let's assume you have a small town. That small town has 1 year of reserves, money in reserve that they just have in a bank account sitting around. Take the money from the bank account, put it in the stock market, and because the towns exist in perpetuity with compounding interest, eventually the money will grow so large that um, you no longer have to pay taxes. That essentially the taxes are paid just based off the investment income of the money, and then you could even maybe start paying off state and federal taxes with this.
That's an interesting idea. Other than I know it like runs afoul of certain things in the Constitution about the government owning private stuff. I
I did
believe.
not
I
know that.
believe.
I
I
know this.
believe stock is one of them.
Huh. Well, they all own some stocks currently. It's just like
Well,
really restricted what stocks they can
well, a
own.
politician can own stock, but I meant like as an estate can't own a business unless it gets some permission from Congress, and then it eventually has to sell it, if I remember correctly. So, like
Huh.
when the
I don't.
government like essentially ended up owning, I think it was like GMC, they eventually had to sell it back to private interests. And
If and maybe it's different at the level of government because I know that there are many cities that own stuff. Like, if nothing else, just they own the electrical companies or the like. Like, there's lots of more city owned, and that cities do invest and hold like a decent share of stocks right now.
I'd have to look into it. It's probably if it's anywhere, it's probably in the Commerce Clause.
Yeah.
But you know,
Well, if you
there
know
might
that,
already be a way around it. So
yeah. But he's been pushing this and fundraising towards it, and I heard him talking about it, and didn't seem right, so I kind of dove into it, and I have a Substack, misescaucusohio.substack.com, and we've been going back and forth because his math was wrong, and he wasn't mentioning that it's illegal in every state that he was trying to push for it, and some other stuff, and he's gotten a lot better. Like now he is talking about the GOP Mises Caucus will lobby to make it legal, and then the Mises Caucus of the Libertarian Party will install the state councilors to actually change the law. But it's just, it'll take 40 years for it to really do much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not
That,
necessarily the worst. I mean, if it works, it works, right? Like,
Yeah. I
yep.
also don't think it works, but for it to even
mm,
like maybe work 40 years.
Yeah, it would take 40 years just for libertarians to lobby to get it passed. I mean,
Eh, maybe.
the issue with things that like, especially when it comes to money in a long time with the government, is that like you stick this money in there, you have to wait 40 years for it to do something, and then eventually someone, probably a Democrat, will come along and say, "We have all this money over here, we could just pull out and then do a thing with."
Yeah.
And then they end up
right.
destroying it before it works.
He goes into some arguments about like how he thinks the incentives will work where hey, as if you have a third party money manager holding the money, they profit based off the more money invested, so they're going to like keep people from like spending too much in things. I mean, I think that he has decent arguments, although kind of other similar systems that have been tried generally haven't worked. If you look at most like sovereign wealth funds or things, and there's a fair bit there, but it's been a fun back and forth. Although I will go on any podcast with him anytime to talk about this, or anytime that I'm available. I can't promise I'm available anytime. And he has refused to ever go face to face with me on this. And the
Ooh.
last podcast he was on talking about what I said, he called me a liar because I said the Mises Caucus, one of our three planks, is lobbying. And he said, no, the Mises Caucus does no lobbying. The Libertarian Party can't lobby. And it's like, okay. It's called the, what is it? The Issue Coalition plank. But if you go to the Issue Coalition part of the website, it says lobbying in bold as a header because that's what it means like half the time. And we do it. So I don't know what he's smoking, but anytime. Open invitation, Andrew. Ball's in your court again.
So it was interesting because like I'm reminded slightly of political polls have been showing up on Facebook, but they've been like hosted by the Republicans and Democrats. So like they don't show you the results, and then of course they just want you to donate money. And
Oh yeah.
but one of the ones that was interesting was on the Republican one, they had a question about like, oh well, canceling the pipeline cost American jobs. It's like, well, they would cost pipeline jobs, but then everyone is out there right now moving a lot of that stuff that would have gone through the Keystone pipeline on trains and on like trucks. So it's not really a jobs question now, is it? It's about efficiency.
Yeah, what is it? Is it the Milton Friedman quote of like he was in China and everyone was digging with shovels and he's like, why don't you use a bulldozer? And they said it's a jobs program. Oh, then why don't you use spoons?
Yeah. Um, and then just to get back on like taxes, of course, you got like I like to do some of my own math, and I was looking into like right now the Democrats, of course, when they do their billionaire tax, which like everyone who has any idea of how economics work and how the tax system works and how the government works is like, yeah, you can't tax unrealized gains, like you just can't, like it'll get thrown out in court in like 3 seconds. But then just for the fun of it, I looked up how much, of course, we owe, which is 30 trillion unless you count unfunded liabilities, and it's like 160 trillion. And then like how much do all of the billionaires on Earth control money wise, and it's only like 13.5 trillion. And so even if you just took everything that all the billionaires have, just 100% of it, you would only pay off less than half of the debt. So it's like, yeah, I don't think the billionaires like are the like you're just I don't think you're going to tax your way out of this problem.
The impressive thing with a wealth tax is it's such a bad tax that it's one of the few that's been entirely repealed in a bunch of countries.
Mm-hmm.
Like every other tax you look at, no matter how bad they are, like land tax or income tax or sales tax, they stick around. But the wealth tax, it was like, I don't remember, I'm going to be a little bit off, like 20-ish years ago, most of Europe had a wealth tax. And now, almost none of Europe has a wealth tax because it was so grossly ineffective.
Right, and it's like when you have, they like to point out, well, the socialist Scandinavian states, which make the Scandinavian states very upset. But when, like, if when they're repealing their wealth tax, like you might have a bad idea.
Plus, at least Norway has state industry. I mean, they make a lot of their money from their oil and gas, which is state controlled, and Norway's state petroleum company is relatively effective compared to like Mexico or Russia. Did you know Mexico was a petroleum producer? I don't
Mm-hmm.
think many people do because it's so unsuccessful.
Oh, I know.
But anyway,
I know that from a few months ago when they punctured. Well, it was actually maybe a few years ago when they punctured a hole in one of their uh, pipelines, and a bunch of people were trying to stand around and catch gasoline in buckets. And then, of course, it inevitably caught on fire and exploded, and a whole bunch of people got burned up.
That's rough.
And that was circulating around the internet. That was like I think like 2 years ago that happened, maybe three. It was before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Which everything that happened before the pandemic, of course, like didn't happen. We're just like it's all pandemic now in Ukraine.
Yeah. Well, what pandemic? We're at war now.
Yeah. Putin single-handedly ended coronavirus.
Yeah. And Will Smith is slapping Chris Rock. I mean, That's slapping COVID away. I mean, it's gone now.
Unless you live in
Hey,
Philadelphia, which we're probably going to talk to Audrey about that because they're locking down again, and of course he's known or she's known for all the whole um, "Don't Tread on Philly," so which started as like an anti-mandate thing.
Or-
at least at least Will Smith didn't slap a Yemeni child fleeing the U.S. genocide there. That would have been really bad.
hmm
So
But
you have to bring it up at least once every podcast, or people forget that the U.S. has killed 1 million civilians since 2014.
I was like talking to like guys at work, and they were doing like they had like the country music awards on TV, and of course everything was like Ukrainian colored.
Yeah,
And I'm just like, I don't think anyone in attendance there knows anything about Ukraine since like other than it's being invaded by Russia. And that doesn't
yeah.
mean that like Russia's doing like I like Russia is doing the wrong thing, but like it's just an example of how everyone can just easily be pulled into like the news being like, look, a thing, you should support it, and they're just being like, yes, we're just going to not be critical whatsoever. Because he was like, well, and when I said that, he goes, well, but they put that guy in charge, and then he killed a bunch of civilians in this town. And I was like, it's not like the U.S. has been doing that for 30 years.
I mean, it's not like the U.S. It had a
Dogs.
Nazi-led coup that overthrew the government, and since 2014, with the CIA staying in Ukraine training people, they've been dropping cluster bombs in civilian cities and killed 14,000 people. And that a couple major regions of Ukraine weren't allowed to vote last time. That would never have happened. We supported democracy.
Well, now Russia. What's funny though, on the other side of the coin, of course, Russia is not getting exactly what they want because now two other countries on the edge of Russia decided that they want to join NATO. So them going into Ukraine to stop Ukraine from joining NATO is now getting more people to join NATO, or want to
Yeah,
anyway. Whether they get approved or not, we'll see.
it's all a cluster.
The law of unintended consequences. It's amazing.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about more fun thing. I know Sweden's one of them, and well, it happens. It's what the metaphor I've been using recently is like you have little children in a cage with a dog, and the dog is Russia. Little children are like Ukraine, whatever else, and the U.S. and NATO are just standing outside the cage, just chucking rocks at the dog. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, the dog shouldn't bite the kids. What about the person chucking rocks?
Yeah. I think that's very accurate. I
Well, as soon
mean,
as you join NATO, you're lifted out of the cage. So the more rocks the U.S. chucks at Russia, the more people like Sweden that were neutral start applying for NATO.
Except for even worse in like Ukraine's case, where they won't let them join NATO.
Well, they won't let Russia join NATO. They applied twice or three times.
Well, they applied when they were still the USSR as well, though, didn't they?
I don't know if I know they applied with under Putin. I don't know if they applied while they were still the USSR.
I think they applied once in, I figured it was like the 60s or 70s, and then just like everyone voted no. And it
I
was
know they
more,
applied twice since,
and I
at
know,
least.
yeah, I know they applied like right after they collapsed
in-
and became
Well,
Russia. Then they immediately applied, and that still didn't. I think if I
I think
remember
they applied twice under Putin also.
really, well,
Yeah.
I don't, I imagine that's true. Like I'm not doubting that, but
I don't
I thought Yeltsin applied or something.
They've probably applied a few times, but open membership in NATO because it's not anti-Russia pact at all. Of course, they'd allow anyone in. Be reasonable.
Yeah, I would expect Yeltsin to have applied, but not Putin. So I'm curious now.
Well,
It makes lots of sense for Putin to apply because, like, he was
I don't know if
trying to reform Russia.
Well, I don't know if they actually applied, but I did. I looked it up real quick, and it said in 1991, Yeltsin did say that their long-term aim was to join NATO.
Okay.
So, anyway, but this is the whole point: is that like hardly anyone knows anything about what's going on in Ukraine, and yet we're expected to immediately take a side and then spend millions of dollars, if not more, like just throwing money at you know the Boeing and all the Lockheed Martin and everything, and it's like, okay, well, maybe we shouldn't.
Well, you're expected to take the right side, not a side, the right side.
Hmm.
No, it's fun to look at the history. I know the Martyr Made podcast did a really detailed one on this. Scott Horton obviously has his talk that's been going around, but there's all this fun stuff, like how every single US major strategist in the last 20, 30 years has said, whatever you do, don't try to bring Ukraine and Georgia into NATO. And but the people that are pushing for Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO just happen to be, when they're not lobbying, major executives of Lockheed Martin.
Hmm.
I wonder why.
Yeah.
So speaking of things getting taken over, uh,
Mm-hmm.
Twitter has been an interesting evolution over the last few things. And it's funny because like they're reporting stuff today that I've known for a few days, especially like Tim's show. He reported two things that if like I don't know if you guys had heard of. So he was reporting that Elon Musk wasn't going to be on the board, and that was what everyone was saying today when Twitter decided they were going to have a meeting about it. But this was actually known like 2 days ago, and people were saying 2 days ago like, well, now he could buy more of the company if he wants to. And so I don't know why all of a sudden today, I guess everyone finally was like, "Oh, we better probably talk about this."
Yeah.
And then,
Uh,
oh, go on.
I was just going to say that I've not been following it that closely, so this is talk away. This is news to me.
So he bought like $4 billion of Twitter, which came out to be like 9 point something percent. Then the board was going to have him on, but they were going to limit him under 15%. So he'd have been like able to buy up to 14.9. Then he did some tweets with polls, and even the guy that chairs the board said the results of these polls will be really interesting or really important. And so like one of them was like, "Do you want an edit button? Do you think like uh, Twitter is helping or hurting free speech and all that?" And then it was announced, well, he's not going to be on the board now. And so allegedly, according to people inside of Twitter, how much you trust them? They're saying like employees are saying like, oh, he's going to change everything and unban people, and it's going to be like an alt right nightmare. And but now he's if he's not on the board, he's free to buy as much of the company as he wants. And then today, I guess this is why they're talking about it today, is so today he offered them like $54.20 a share, so you got the 420 in there, and which is a third over what it's evaluated at to buy out the company for $43 billion. And so then he would basically be able to take it private and do whatever he wants. And then I guess one of the large shareholders from the Middle East somewhere, I don't know which country he's from, said it was a bad idea. But the board had their meeting at 1 o'clock, and I don't know if any news has come out since then because my eyes have been hurting because I had to get new glasses, and it's been 3 months that I've been trying to get new glasses. It's a long story, but anyway, I didn't feel like reading any articles this afternoon, which is why we're a little less prepared than normal today. And so that's what's going on there.
Okay. That's fun. 'Cause I've been loosely hearing Elon Musk is taking aim at Twitter, and it's gonna. I've been seeing all the worst people saying stuff about how, like, what I'm trying to remember now of the Lindsey Graham or those people saying, "Oh, if he takes over, this will be some vague right wing apocalypse." And I'm like, well, you've been wrong in every other prediction, so let's try it again. Let's keep that 0 for 20 streak going, and I'll if I had to bet, if Lindsey Graham makes a prediction, I'm betting against whatever he says.
I can agree with that.
Yeah.
Not a
It's
gambling
crazy.
man, but that
Yeah.
sounds like a good strategy.
There's some people that are great because they're always wrong. Like the other one, what's his name? Robert Reich, the labor
Yeah.
secretary under Clinton that pretends to be an economics person in spite of having never studied economics. I think if I remember right, he's the one that's never actually studied economics, but like pr- plays an economist on TV. So he had these videos for a while that got like moderately popular, where he would go through like 8 facts about whatever, and he'd have like a whiteboard and it does, that animation thing where it draws super fast. They sped up the time. Going through this economic stuff. and it was legitimately impressive that he never got a single thing right. Like at best, it was like maybe correct, but needs more context. It was literally something I'd do. Is because back when I was a baby libertarian, I would go through and watch his videos, and if I ever found myself agreeing, I would look it up. And that was my like, hey, where is there still propaganda in me? And like, and if I had found out that he was right, I would have kept going with it. But no, every single time, consistently, without fail, he is wrong.
Yeah, there's a lot of that out there. Let's see. Uh, like that's the way. I don't know why I'm just drawing a blank today. I'm like not with it.
We can jump back to Swedish welfare states and how everyone like we can go wherever. I talk about everything.
I
I can
mean,
take over your podcast for you.
I was thinking that the wealth tax difficult to implement. I mean,
Yes.
so far the two primary strategies that I've been aware of were Elizabeth Warren's, where she wanted to tax undisclosed wealth and assets like fine art and jewelry and Kriegerans and all the ways that people get around paying taxes. Yeah, that sounds like it would go really well. And now there have been rumblings about an unrealized gains tax, which is also trying to tax something immaterial and is has terrible potential ramifications for business and investment.
There's already the great meme where it's
So,
like taxing realized. It's like one of the expanding minds ones. It's like taxing realized gains, taxing unrealized gains, writing off unrealized losses, claiming unrealized dependence.
yeah, I like that.
It's so wild, especially because like the whole concept of a wealth tax is so rough because it is just all ephemeral. Like I don't know if you have 1 billion shares of Twitter and each, but right now a marginal share of Twitter is $3. That doesn't mean you have $3 billion because as soon as you start selling, it tanks. It doesn't mean anything. Like all these big evaluations are just numbers in the spreadsheet, and it's why like the inheritance tax is so rough because you have this person that the inheritance tax essentially hits small business owners. Anyone who's really rich gets a lawyer and figures out how to avoid it by setting up a trust, and anyone who's like not that well off slides under it. But then like small business owners where like their business is evaluated to be worth a lot, but it's like there's not that much capital, kind of people screwed by this. You have, I don't know, $10 million in stuff to pass down to your kid, but it's in the form of a business. Your kid has to pay $500,000 by next Tuesday.
Yeah, it was supposed to be 20%. So if it was like 10 million, it'd be $2 million
Yeah, sorry,
dollars.
2 million. Yeah, but what happens is, oh, how do you get $2 million when there's like $0 in assets, but like it's a money capital flow is what it's being evaluated based off of, and all that happens is a big player comes in and buys you out, and you're over a barrel and have no choice. And J.P. Morgan just got your company for like 3 or 4 million.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, and the thing is that the whole thing, according to Biden, was supposed to like cut off if you didn't have like a net worth of 100 million or more. But I don't really know how you're going to enforce that. And it's
Yeah.
like, but even if you wanted to use like a hyperbolic example, you go to the thrift store, you buy a painting for $10. It turns out to be a Van Gogh. It's worth $110 million, and like you don't have $20 million. So now you have to sell the thing. I mean, I guess that wouldn't be the worst thing because you'd be like, well, I still got $80 million, I guess. But then do you get like capital gains on top of that? Well, you can't double tax people. Like it doesn't.
Well, but the harder thing is that you don't. It's you're when you buy a painting for $1 million, no one else was willing to pay $1 million for it. You were the top bidder in the auction. So to anyone else, the painting's worth, I don't know,
Well, I was talking about those
900.
weird cases where people go to the thrift store and they buy something and it turns out to be something
Yeah,
else, and so they got it super cheap, and
that's
then
true.
you know,
Sure. Yeah,
It's all wild. But no one remembers that all the other countries used to have it, and everyone uses all of Northern Europe as just terrible examples. Like, what's a fun one? Like, do you know that all the Scandinavian countries have been rolling back all their welfare stuff for the past like 2 decades or 3 decades?
and then even like the UK and Canada are talking about like what they're gonna have to do to make their systems viable because they're like just pouring their entire economy into it. And then on top of that, most of the countries that have those healthcare systems are relying on like the US for their defense anyway. And it's like, well, the US doesn't have the US to rely on to defense because we are the US. Like there isn't there isn't like Canada's not gonna like build tanks and fly airplanes to keep, Mexico out of our airspace. Not that that's really a problem, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. Or here's another fun one. You've heard people call for a single payer medical system, right?
Yeah.
So, in a federally administered single top-down single payer, how many other countries in the world have a top-down federally administered single payer healthcare system?
I thought it was just two. I thought it was just Canada and the UK.
Just the UK.
I just,
Canada's province by province.
oh, is it?
Yep. All of the ones people call single payer, one, they used to be like real single payer, and then they're like, this is awful, let's add in a private option.
What?
Like my family grew up in Sweden, and my great grandmother, she waited in line for cataract surgery for 5 years, only to be told she's 2 years too old. They don't bother giving it to people like over a certain age. Like that's what the system used to be. So they got rid of that, but now it's all done at like the county, state, province level. It's not the single payer system they imagine doesn't exist.
I know that like in Canada, like for a while, like private insurance was illegal, and then they changed it where you can have supplemental insurance. And I think they did that in 2013 and 14 when I lived there for a year. And then, but I even thought theirs was effectively single payer, but I guess theirs was just unique in that like private wasn't an option at all. Maybe that was the
Yeah.
other thing that made them unique, even though it wasn't still technically single payer.
So that's what people they're not clearly defined. That's what people normally define as like a true single payer system, which is what like Sweden and them all used to have, but it kind of has gone away. But in Canada, if you're on a road trip and you get in an accident in a different province, sometimes you're literally not covered at all.
Hmm.
There's some horror stories about that. But then there's the other fun stuff when you have like a when the government pays for medical care, they're going to deny immigration because a child has Down syndrome and that's too expensive.
Right. And
well,
that's
that
where,
sounds like something they would do
Yeah.
because
yeah.
they have an expedited immigration track if you have at least $30,000 in assets, I believe.
Well, then I don't know. Well, you're probably old enough. I don't know if you are, Peter, but back when like they did the 2012 election, was it or 2012, when they were talking about Obamacare, and then there was the whole like media. One of the buzzwords was death panels, and
Yes.
both sides
Yeah.
being like the Republicans being like, well, they're going to make death panels that just decide you don't get care and you're going to die now, and then
Yeah.
the Democrats being like,
First of
that's
all, that already
ridiculous.
happens.
Yeah. No, you always have death panels. It's similar to the border debate. It's like, okay, unless you're actually an open borders person, one there is one person too many crossing the border, you're going to have to arrest them and put them somewhere. So if your problem with the border is you don't like seeing kids in cages or whatever stuff, you need to be entirely open borders, and most Democrats aren't. But it's like, no, no matter your immigration policy, as long as there is a line and more people come over than the line, you need to arrest them,
And
right? And it's
this is where like sometimes some of the Mises people, because I didn't come in through Dave Smith or Michael Heiss, I didn't hear about them till after. I found Mises accidentally because the PA convention, not this year but last year, was in my neighborhood. But I had
right.
been like basically libertarian since like 2002.
Yeah.
And And I didn't even really follow Ron Paul that closely. I listened to talk radio, and it was like I like 25% agree with like the fiscal part of the Republicans and nothing else. And when I do agree with them, it's usually because they've arrived at the right conclusion the wrong way.
Sounds about right.
I came in post Ron Paul. I don't know how old I look, but I'm on the young side at 26. So
Oh,
I would have maybe, I think I would have been able to vote in 2012, but it was so close. Actually, no, actually, I don't think I could vote in 2012. Or
mm.
no, I could vote, but I was out of the country. That's what it was. Yes, I could vote, but I couldn't vote in the primary. I could vote in the general, but I was out of the country, if I remember correctly. I think that's the
Well,
story I'm going with.
well, then I'm. Well,
Absentee ballot overseas. That's what I did. Come on.
it might be
Yeah,
some.
means I cared between the Republicans and Democrats, and even then I'm like, hey, like you guys are watching the same debate and they're like the same, right? And I hadn't heard of Ron Paul, but I was like, between Mitt Romney and Obama, I don't see much daylight.
I mean, back then, it was like I was describing Mitt Romney as someone walked into the RNC and took the cardboard cutout of a Republican and put them on stage to run.
I think that's still too generous.
His his
At least
hair.
the
He was
cardboard cutout of a
remarkable.
Republican would look like a Republican.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Well, and then what's funny though is that it makes me surprisingly the oldest one here by a fair margin. I'm 37 of all things.
You are the oldest.
And
Over in spirit, it's okay.
and so just and what's funny is where I get in trouble with some of the Mises people though is I still describe myself as a minarchist, and they're like, but anarchy ain't. I'm like, well, look, the first thing is that these systems don't respond well to like gigantic instant changes, right? Like if you could just snap taxes out of existence, like you break the economy. Like I'd like to snap taxes out of existence, but rather the way I like to look at it is that you take things away from the government until you break something, and then you reluctantly put it back until you figure out how to take it away again.
So now I know what the rest of the conversation's about.
It's like an agile development strategy for the government. Minimum viable government. Minimum viable product, minimum viable government.
Well, so the my favorite example that I'll point to is the ancient Iceland one, but of course there's a few different ones. Um, with or the other one being the state in the third millennium by the Prince of Liechtenstein. Um, but why we can disaggregate the services of government. They don't need to be lumped together. You can have one person does schools, one does defense, one does whatever. Separate all these things out. And once you do, and once you allow competition within them, which is what ancient Iceland did, which was you could keep your house in the same place, but choose what chieftain you wanted to be in charge of you. And kind of the more people supporting a chieftain, the more like support they had in like the federation voting bloc government. And that's all you need to do. You don't need to abolish governance. You just need to abolish the monopoly of the state. I'm anti-monopoly and just competition. So I'm not saying get rid of all government structure. I'm just saying disaggregate it. So the person who is in charge of um, being the police and taking money from you when you break the law shouldn't be the same person who gets to spend said money.
Oh yeah, totally. Well, that's why I'm super against like public unions. Like there shouldn't be a teachers union because you're end running the whole legislative process. Like you're demanding more money out of the tax system when you're not having anyone vote on it. You're going around the entire, not a legislator is voting on it, not a person is voting on it. You're just saying like give us more money or else. And it's like, okay, well that's not like that might work for Ford or something, but that's like not how teachers or policemen or firemen or any of that should work.
Well, there's a bunch of other weird things with it too, like how Bernie Sanders won't accept money from corporations, but unions are literally corporations
Right.
in everything but name, and they are a massive donation block and gave a bunch of money to him and all this stuff.
And when they can get corrupt is when they get monopolies on the labor force. Like the auto workers union, for example, has a huge monopoly on labor force in the automotive industry in the U.S.
All monopolies in the U.S. are corrupt, or all unions in the U.S. are corrupt. and I think it was under FDR, but so in most countries, let's say 51% of the workers want to be part of a union, right?
Mm-hmm.
They become part of the union, and the rest are just part of a different union or doing whatever on their own. And in just the US and I think one or two other countries, I think two other countries, um, if 51% says we're joining the union, everyone's in the union, you have no say, and there's never a vote on whether or not people leave the union.
Right.
You get one vote 1 year that for some reason 51% of people woke up on the wrong side of the bed and had a terrible boss, vote join union. That company is unionized until it dissolves, essentially.
Yeah, and then what's funny is that, and I'm certainly not arguing that the Teamsters Union isn't corrupt, because I mean, like they're quite famously the poster child of being corrupt as a union. But I do think it's funny because I had some Democrats asking me like, well, how would like why aren't conditions better for truck drivers? Like, why don't the truck drivers form a union? I was like, well, they have the Teamsters Union, and they're like, well, then why aren't they like changing the hours of service? I was like, because they want to get rid of them. And then they're like, well, what about the drivers? Like, the drivers want to get rid of them too.
Don't be part of the union. Like, that's the truth no one on the left swallows, which is people saw what unions are like and they don't want it, because what a union means is they raise wages by keeping people out of the job. That's the only way you can raise wages as a union, and they lift up the lowest common denominator.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was just thinking it was funny because for like maybe one of the first times in recent history, like the union and the drivers, and even the drivers not in the union, are all on board with like, we want less regulation instead of like lobbying to get more.
Okay, gotcha.
But that's what they can't
Like
wrap their
that-
head around, is they're like, well, why don't the drivers want the government to like step in? And they're like, they just don't. They don't. They want the government to go away.
That's I think it was Thad Russell's first book that was his thesis paper on Jimmy Hoffa, and I think it was Jimmy Hoffa. I'm a bit bad with names. He wrote a book about the most successful union in the US, like during the main unionization period.
Mhm.
And what they were was like a vaguely right-wing union run as a business. As in, hey, you get your membership and I will provide you the best services. Like pure the union competing with other unions. Like, we are running this like a business, we are serious, and our members are right-wing, we're right-wing as all heck.
Mm-hmm.
And the left doesn't like to remember them because, well, unions support us, right? The workers love us.
Right, and it's just, I mean, but and the thing is like, just driving up costs and everything. Although that's one of the funny things is I watch Anthony Davis, who is an economist, and he was saying, in a sense, he made this video that was like 10 myths about inflation, but it's actually 16 myths about like inflation, but that's because the number of myths had to account for inflation.
Yeah, that's what I heard.
And
Video inflated in the middle. Each minute started containing 90 seconds.
yeah, and it's but he was saying like inflation, one of the things he says, because he's not, I mean, like he talks for like Learn Liberty, which is a libertarian YouTube channel. I've had it pointed out to me by people in debates on the left, oh, they take Koch brother money. It's like, okay, well, name a major like organization that doesn't take money from somebody that someone doesn't like somewhere.
Yeah.
But in any case, he's not strictly libertarian, although he's probably more libertarian than anything else. But anyway, he was talking about like how inflation only matters in two senses. And one, if you're not prepared for it, and two, if you want to be able to save like your money.
I disagree with that. I disagree pretty heavily.
But well, he was still saying that it's bad in the sense that like, because most inflation isn't accounted for. He's very anti the Fed.
Well, it's not even that. It's that with the Cantillon effect, the way that inflation works is someone's handed the money first.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah.
No matter how prepared you are, the person that's handed the money first gains the value and everyone else loses. And you can lose less if the first thing that person does is buy stocks and you own a bunch of stocks, like you're not affected as hard, but still
well,
the person
he makes
first gains.
He makes that point as well, right?
Yeah.
but like in the sense, what I forget where this was. I had somewhere I was going with this, and I can't remember where. But it was just like the the value of things. It had something to do with taxes, and it's because less to do with inflation and more to just do with like the idea that like I was working my way around to like we have to somehow find a way to like cut down this ridiculous government spending.
Yeah, it'll collapse.
And
Easy answer.
I had a train of logic that I was going to start down, and I don't know where I lost it somewhere in the middle.
It happens.
Hopefully, this cat she's climbing on my computer doesn't do something terrible to us.
Just bring her on the show. Put her on the fourth mic.
If she would let me pick her up, she's not a huge fan of that.
Oh, that's fair.
But yeah.
No, but you're talking about how do we repeal this stuff and breaking things down. Like, honestly, if I'm not gonna bet, but a lot of other empires have broken up in the past.
Mm-hmm. And that's gonna
Yeah,
be the thing. The thing is like
I
some.
think that's the most logical path forward is for this to put new leadership into the states and have them realize that states' rights are important. Just bring back states' rights and have more state sovereignty and just slowly water down the Fed that way rather than
Confederate.
I don't know. But although this does remind me, sort of where I was going in some sense with the inflation thing is it's interesting. It screws up everyone that wants to have ordinary lives, right? But it's like it's it's kind of interesting. Well, because like most people don't have a job that builds in like the cost of living, and by the time it's reflected, they've already lost a bunch of that of wealth. You know, things that their bank accounts get drained of money. Like it reorganizes their finances, which can cause them to go into temporary debt that doesn't go away as quickly once they do get an adjustment, etc. So there's all these negative impacts on people, and of course the government always tries to fix it by taxing more somehow. Like they're going to be able to pull that money out of the economy, but they don't just put it into a giant trash bag and set it on fire. They give it out to other people, which means it doesn't fix anything. And so you get this ratcheting up. But it's interesting on like the global scale, like how money almost like doesn't matter anymore in a weird way, where like countries are defaulting to each other. Nobody seems to care. They're printing money. Like they don't care. Like they cut off Russia, and Russia's just like not paying people, and they're like, whatever, we'll ding their credit score, but like we're not going to go to war over it. It's just like the wheels are coming off, and we can see it happening. It's just it hasn't like actually blown up yet, but you can sort of see we're just like the whole institution's slowly becoming like a joke. Like the U.S. owes 167 trillion in unfunded liabilities, which is like more than everything in every store in every country on Earth by like 1.5 times.
Well, but a few other countries have gone belly up since the start of the Fed, like the total fiat money, but everyone's been backing the dollar. Like literally that was the promise, was that other countries started going fiat, but they're going to keep dollars in reserve and the US keeps gold in reserve. If the dollar goes, no one's ever seen what would happen. I have no idea. If someone tells you they know what's going to happen, yeah.
Right.
I don't know what will happen, but something like the money system will explode. I don't know what that means.
Because the last two times that there was a major nearing global reserve currency like this, of course, the first time was with the Holy Roman Empire. But the thing is that there was still an awful lot of hard assets, and the relationship and the economy were all local. So when it went, it didn't really matter as much. Right. And then the second time when we went from the pound sterling to the dollar after World War II, well, again, economic relationships were not as local as they were during the Holy Roman Empire, but they were still somewhat local. And you essentially had all of the manufacturing in Europe already physically destroyed anyway. So there wasn't really a functioning system to collapse at the moment.
So, but even in both of those cases, one like the with the Romans, they
Hmm.
still like the coins are getting clipped, but there were still solid, tangible, valuable silver coins like floating
Right.
around.
Yeah, that's
So
what I
like,
was saying.
well, but I'm saying it's not just you were saying that like it was a local trade, but I'm saying even the money itself wasn't literally worthless. Like
Yeah.
it still held something. And then same with the pound sterling and all that stuff. There were still a bunch of competing currencies circling through all the areas that had pound sterlings. Like the US was still using Spanish silver dollars and the like. So it wasn't you didn't have the hegemony that we have now.
Right, where it's like literally based on nothing.
And that there's like in the US there is one currency and like except Bitcoin and like the 0.01% whatever, but it's like previously even like in Britain it's like oh no there would still be other currencies circling through and I have no idea what's going to happen. It's going to be wild. There's going to be fireworks.
Yeah, and it's like I think this was something I was trying to get at with the Anthony Davis, because one of the things he did say was like, everyone likes to think of like gold as this solid thing, but if you have like a total collapse, like gold doesn't really have intrinsic value either. It has much better intrinsic value than like the dollar does, right? Because there's a demand for it, particularly in like the electronics industry, where
Mhm.
like the only demand the dollar has, if like all of a sudden everyone stopped believing it, is in like material to start campfires with.
I don't know. I think that gold is a decent chunk between electronics industry, but also jewelry, because people are like, because jewelry is still an intrinsic like value of the metal, even if sometimes there's some debates with that. The
Hmm.
only non-intrinsic one would be the ones held as a monetary reserve. I have been thinking about this. I do believe that the rise of Bitcoin means that gold has a lot less value as a reserve. So if we hit another 2008 style thing, it won't spike as much, and
Oh,
Bitcoin will like eat a bunch of its spike.
we had a cat on screen for a second there. She jumped across from whatever. Anyway. Yeah, the whole Bitcoin thing is interesting. I know that they've like been able to set up Bitcoin farms and de-anonymize things with like especially with like the online markets and stuff, but it's still, I think, a lot. I think it's moving in the right direction. I don't think it's the final coin, but I think it's like an enormous leap towards whatever comes next, especially getting rid of like whatever it is, like Swift or whatever.
Yeah, I hope that like Swift and what is it, Ripple's the other one, the federal bank currencies. Yeah, I hope they don't catch on.
Well, no,
I have
Swift is the isn't Swift the system they already use, like the phone line
oh
system
yeah,
to
yeah. Sorry,
process.
I mixed up.
But
I
Ripple,
was
yeah,
thinking Ripple's what they're using to replace it. The ones I'm excited about right now are probably still Monero and Ethereum. So Monero is just one of the best for like privacy and stuff, and Ethereum. Um, the smart contracts are amazing, and the other one is that they're looking at potentially moving to proof of stake claims. So if with Bitcoin, it's proof of work, which is the more machine power that you run, the more vote that you have in what happens, because no one can reach a consensus, no one can change Bitcoin. It's like safe and immutable. That what proof of stake would mean would be essentially grandfathering in whoever had the biggest proof of work at the time, they keep it, but now they don't need to run as many electronics, and all of a sudden we get all the same value of Bitcoin or Ethereum, but the electrical amount of electricity spent to do it is cut by like 100 or 1,000 or something.
yeah, and then also Ethereum and a lot of coins compared to Bitcoin have a much faster transaction processing time,
Yeah,
which the more people use Bitcoin, it gets like exponentially worse.
they put the Lightning Network and everything on top of it, so it's improved from back when I got Bitcoin. I had one Bitcoin, that I got for $600 back in like right before the Bitcoin Cash fork, and I was following the news, and I'm like, okay, Bitcoin Cash fork's coming. It's gonna plummet. Sold it off. So I bought for 600, sold for 900, made 50% profit, and I'm
Nice.
happy.
Yeah.
Um, so what are your final objections to anarchy, Eli?
Oh, I don't
Why
have
aren't
any
you?
objections to it. I just say like you hold it as an ideal and work towards it. Like if you
Yeah.
tried to just dump into it like in like overnight, like you could
Oh, okay.
like it would
That's fair. That's
you would
fair.
break a bunch of stuff. But if you ease your way into it, and then when you break things, be like, all right, well maybe we need a new piece of technology or just a certain social consensus before we can implement this thing, right?
Yeah, you just privatize industries one by one until there's nothing left.
Like right now we've like completely destroyed a significant portion of charity work and charities to
Yeah.
where most people are just like, well, the government will take care of it, right? And so it's not like in the 1920s, which of course things got bad, which is why they did the stupid whole New Deal thing anyway. But we have even less in the terms of like churches and things taking care of people now than even then. And so it's just
That's
like,
not why they did the New Deal.
no, it's not the only reason why they did it. What I'm saying is that sometimes there's like a social aspect where you got to get people to be like, no, like you actually have to do this for yourself. Like,
So I disagree in the sense that those kind of programs have almost never been successfully gradually repealed. Like the few times it's worked has been like a USSR breakup,
oh, I agree
and
with that. Yeah.
there's the rough transition period, but it's like you're coming off a heroin, like you're gonna go through withdrawal, easing off slowly, just in theory it could work, but so rarely it does. So US breaks up and then you have like, I don't know, New Hampshire will show the way.
Oh yeah, well, there's certain things you can't ease into for sure. That's not what I meant. I meant where like as in like sometimes there's like a social component where people aren't willing to do certain things or don't have an understanding of certain things,
Yeah.
right?
And I
Like,
and I, I agree with that. I'm just saying that if you try to slowly transition to the system where they have to do those things again, they will reject it and it will never go anywhere. Instead, you need to rip the band-aid off, and as much as people will be uncomfortable with the transition, and some people may never transition back, like that was still true. And like there were people after the USSR fell that were still saying was better back then, and I don't know how to join groups without the government telling me to. Um, the cost of transition is worth the consequence, or the outcome is worth the cost, because there's
oh
no way
yeah,
around the cost.
I'm trying to think of a good example, and I can't right now. I don't know
What, you
why.
can't think of a single program the government's walked back?
No, no, no,
Shocker.
not that. I meant I'm trying to think of a good example for like where social change has to happen to get somewhere, and I'm just not. See, the thing is, I take ADHD medicine, and I ran out the other day, and they didn't want to give it to me, even though it's not a stimulant one, it's a non-stimulant one. So it's like it, and I got it today, and it's not. I don't think it's 100% built back up yet. Where I'm just
That's rough. That we can just have a more ADHD conversation.
yeah. The problem is I'm trying to make points and I'm getting halfway to my point and then I forget where I was going and I'm like I just said a bunch of stupid stuff that I had like the thing to tie it together and I can't.
We'll just say that I bribed you before the show to make me look extra smart in comparison.
Yeah. And that was a funny one. What was it? It was I forget who it was. They had asked a guy a question similar to this, and he was like, "Well, when I got into libertarianism, they would say crazy things like, abolish the Department of Education, but then they would say, well, name one metric that's improved since they were fully in charge in the '80s, and like there isn't one."
Or people just don't remember, like, don't realize how recent this stuff is. Like, I was doing a debate on abolishing the police, like abolishing government police, essentially. It ended up there was a messing up, so it didn't get recorded, which I'm sad about. But hey, that's life. Um, People don't realize that the government police only came in like the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Hmm.
That the founding fathers had no government cops, that wasn't a part of the US, that they were put in place as riot control by a bunch of wealthy people in big cities. And as soon as they got put in place as riot control, the riots got way more deadly and violent and destructive. And that they've had a abysmal track record since.
Yeah,
Yeah, and some people even argue that the police were created to pit minorities against each other.
What? The government would never divide and conquer. How could that happen?
No,
Seems
certainly not.
unrealistic.
Yeah, all men are created equal, surely.
I mean, there was this one book written about it, but it was Chinese, so we should just not read it at all.
What? No, what book is this?
The Art of War.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
I don't know. I was perusing the English version of this. You know, the British Empire's history of every single colony where they pitted people against each other successfully.
yeah, and one of the things too where I've said, and this goes back to what I think you were saying, uh, with I think it's possible that we can accidentally design our way into a society that isn't necessarily good for people. And this ties exactly to what you're saying, where like these things haven't existed for so long. It's like for the 8,000 some years of human history that we have, it's like for the first time now are we remanding our children into the custody of strangers for the majority of the developmental years, right?
Yeah.
Like just because we can do it, and even if you say, well, it works, like is that really the way people are meant to socialize? I don't know. Like, is it good for us? I'm starting to think it's not. And that doesn't mean that I want to go full on paleocon and be like, no, women need to stay home. But at this, and it's certainly not, I don't think necessarily a problem for the government to solve. In fact, it's a problem the government created. But
Yeah.
I'm just saying that what we're doing, I don't know that it's good for us. Not that we should go back to like strong gender roles, but like if we could get back to a place where parents could raise their own kids, might be good for us.
So I disagree a bit because the truth is the nuclear family is a lie, and it never was the parents raising their own kids. Because the thing that we've forgotten about, and it's not really talked about in the US, is extended families.
Hmm.
It was one aunt raising like three families worth of kids and rotating, or the grandparents raising the kids, or it's like it used to be mom and dad could take a break, or it's specialization where one person raises them, or you rotate and like take turns and all this stuff. And that all came from the extended family, which there's a bunch of reasons that got destroyed in the US, government being a big part of it, and just being a nation of immigrants and like travelers or the government road system and all this stuff.
Well, yeah, no, I agree with what you're saying.
Village.
That would be great. It's just
It's hard to get back to. It's hard to rebuild those structures.
mm-hmm.
But
All
and then
right.
the thing that does frustrate me with the paleocons is my dad's a bit of a conservative and I like having the conversation about abolishing the police. And he does that kind of Jordan B. Peterson or whatever line of watch out about making big changes, you don't know what'll happen, or like that don't tear down the fence till you know why it's built up. And because if you make a big change and you be this radical, you don't know all the unintended consequences. And the thing that I try to explain to them that I never get through well enough is the system now, it is the big change. Like the cops weren't here, like the cops are new, the government schools are new. I'm not saying make the big change. I'm saying you look at the big change that happened and tell me, was it a good one? And if not, let's go back.
Yeah, and I think um, that's a great place to think about concluding. And perhaps in our next episode, I think that this whole defund the police movement has been confused and reconstructed by different interests. And I would say that what people are actually asking for is not to abolish the police, but to, let's say, refund the police, sort of restructure, rejigger, like let's let's stop and think about how policing ought to work.
I mean, I would say that the biggest problem with police right now, and it doesn't mean that the solution is that we change this. The solution might be we go to a different system completely. But if you were like you're stuck with the current system, like how do you fix it, right? It's that like they're in charge of their own oversight. Like why is internal affairs internal? Like you would think you'd want to put a different branch of government in charge, the whole thing balance, like have judges oversee internal affairs or something. just like it's just not working. Where like no one, especially the government, isn't going to be accountable to themselves that much. Where you can put the same department in charge of like, no, we didn't do anything wrong. Who else can look into this? Nobody. All right, well, case closed then. It's like that shouldn't be how it works.
Right, and
That's
this will
bullshit.
sound pretty extreme, but the purpose of police, right? So we can agree that the purpose of police is because we're saying as a society that you're accountable for your own actions. But if the police are not accountable for their own actions by design, by legal word, then one could conclude very devilishly, admittedly, that if you want to be a criminal, just become a cop.
I mean,
Which
that's
is a pretty,
have
I
you
know it's a pretty extreme thing to say, but if you look at the way
have you been
some
following
of
the
these things
news?
work.
Sorry, I'll let you finish.
No, that's all
Uh,
I
have you
was
been
gonna say. And
have you
I'm
been
admittedly
following?
bear baiting, but
I'm gonna blame the lag for me talking over you. Have you been following the news about the cop gangs in San Francisco and the like? Where literally within the cops, there are criminal gangs that are all like having matching tattoos and gang signs.
Wow.
great. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what we wanted.
It's a reoccurring thing. It's not just there. It's a not entirely uncommon thing for the cops to literally form a criminal gang within the cops. Because yeah, no, that's that their purpose isn't protect and serve. It's a really bad motto because, as the Supreme Court's ruled, they have no duty to protect and no duty to serve.
Yeah, that's another. That's like a thing we should have like a whole episode on.
Yeah, stay
Hey, I
tuned.
will talk about abolishing cops anytime.
Yeah, I'll even tell the story about why I love the police.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a thing in the Discord, and maybe we'll have to have you back on and do a thing. See, look, my camera quit again. I don't know what it is. Like it gets to a certain time point, and it's like the background returns. Maybe that.
Overheating?
Whoa, it's exactly 10 o'clock.
Yeah. So, in any case, I think that'll be a
Come
good
on.
point to cut it off, and maybe we'll have to have you back, and we'll do like a whole thing on the police, and it'll be more structured that time.
Yeah, and maybe
Oh,
Eli will finally pay for his virtual background shareware. Come on. Just get the full license, Eli. Come on.
I'm just using OBS. It's just I think what it is that Discord wants to control the camera, and OBS wants to control the camera, and OBS can only like hold on to it for so long, and then after like an hour, like
yeah,
Discord takes it
reset.
back.
That makes sense. But no, there's all this fun stuff, and then there's other like the thing you're talking about. There's so many examples like this idea gentrification, where there was this really radical idea, then it got taken and stolen. I can keep rambling forever, so I'm glad you guys had me on. Or is this the time when we do plugs or whatever?
Yeah, sure. If you've got anything to get out there,
Plugs and
Um,
grand
and I'll
conclusions.
stick stuff in the comment, or not in the comments, but in the description.
yep. If you I this is coming out soon, right?
Yeah. I'll upload it as soon as we stop recording.
Um, register for the Libertarian Party of Ohio convention. It'll be fun. We have Donald Rainwater, governor candidate of I think it was Indiana, coming to speak. We have Clint Russell of Liberty Lockdown coming to speak. It'll be a fun party. Go to lpo.org, donate money to us, check us out on Twitter, or Mises Caucus of Ohio. Also, we have a Substack. People write articles. It's mostly me writing articles. If you want to hear me yell about more stuff, or follow that on Twitter as well. I think that's all the plugs.
And you have by you I mean Ohio has like one of the last conventions of the year, don't they? Before Reno.
Our convention is so late. It is April. Let me double check this date. April 29th through May 1st.
Hmm. Yeah, and then Reno's only like 2 weeks after that or 3 weeks after that.
It's pretty soon after.
All right. Well, that'll be where we end it. I'll see you guys next week.